And welcome to today's webinar, Simulation 101, Creating Catchments in Civil 3D to Simulate Hydrology and InfoDrainage. This webinar is brought to you by GRAITEC. My name is Misty Scott, and I am pleased to be your moderator today. You can find a schedule of upcoming events, webinars, and training on our calendar at asti.com/calendar. And while you're here today, we'd love the chance to learn more about how we can best serve you and your businesses. So if you could take a moment to answer the poll questions to the right of your screen, it would help us learn how we can best serve you. We'd also like to invite you to check out our training and services for Civil 3D. You can scan the QR code on the screen, but I will also add these at the end during the Q&A. All right, very pleased to introduce our expert today. Kenneth is an implementation consultant for AE at GRAITEC with over 20 years of experience in civil engineering, surveying, and infrastructure solutions with expertise in Civil 3D, GIS services, and stormwater management. Ken is a trusted specialist in helping clients optimize their civil engineering workflows. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kenneth, and I'm going to turn it on over to you.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for joining everyone. And today's presentation and kind of conversation is in reference to Civil 3D. And for the most part, Civil 3D creating catchments is something that we typically do in terms of working on a conceptual project with the surface or anything like that. But depending on what version of Civil 3D that you have, you will see certain things. And I'll just make reference to that as I kind of talk about these things. But again, as a agenda in terms of what we're going to talk about, we're going to just talk about the history of what you have with Civil 20 version 2020 all the way to version 2024. And most of you will see those things. And then we'll talk about catchments in Civil 3D, how to create a catchment, some of the particulars in terms of catchment properties, in terms of runoff and things like that, and then workflows in Civil 3D and also in InfoDrainage. And then just to throw in a pipe network and look at some of the runoff routing tools and be able to generate some rainfall, and then the interoperability between Civil 3D and InfoDrainage in reference to hydrology and what happens when you try to move catchments from one product to the other product and those type of things that you typically have challenges with. So the first thing is a little bit about the history in terms of what Civil 3D brings to the table. If you're using Civil 3D 2024, you have HydroFlow, storm sewers, you have HydroFlow hydrographs, you have HydroFlow Express. Out of the three HydroFlow applications, you have also storm and sanitary analysis. And then you also have what's known as the analyzed gravity network for inlets. And then you also have that catchment area previously. This one is not for modeling, and some would say, well, why is it there? But in the previous versions, you didn't have a lot of this functionality. So therefore, might be the reason it's there. But why InfoDrainage? Because we have all these programs, but why InfoDrainage? Well, one, the HydroFlow solutions are antiquated, and so is the storm and sanitary analysis. And now that we have these more technologically advanced modeling like EPA SWIM, XP SWIM engines, these are some of the things that allow us to address hydrology and hydraulics a lot better. So as we move on, some of the benefits of working with InfoDrainage. So we know that the HydroFlow extensions in terms of storm sewers and things like that only do steady flow and doesn't do multi-thread simulation and doesn't use unlimited simulations in terms of running analysis for storm sewers, pond, and even the Express tool. And sometimes you have the ability to use storm and sanitary analysis, which does hydrodynamic steady flow also, and kinematic wave. But that is even limited because, again, it's antiquated. And if I had time to show you, I would. But as of right now, InfoDrainage has been with Autodesk for coming up on 3 years now. So everything that you see on the left-hand side in terms of hydraulics, drainage design aids, interoperability between Civil 3D, even BIM now, and the user interface, traditionally, InfoDrainage has them all. And because storm and sanitary analysis has the ability to do hydrodynamic, kinematic wave, a little bit more advanced hydraulic engine, I've listed the things for storm and sanitary analysis, and you can see they don't even compare to InfoDrainage. So right now, InfoDrainage is not in Civil 3, but just think about the process and the history of Autodesk with its hydrology programs. It acquired HydroFlow extensions, put it into Civil 3D in 2008. Also, with the storm and sanitary analysis, acquired that in 2013, put it in Civil 3D. And now we have this idea of InfoDrainage and some other tools. So it's just a natural aggression to getting to that point. So right now you don't have it, but you can get a 30-day trial. So what is InfoDrainage? So a full design and analysis solution for designers, developers, landscape architects, engineers, consultants, and then also this program really allows you to do a comprehensive assessment of stormwater designs and also runoff reduction, detention ponds, things like that. So hydrology and hydraulics. And from we think about this idea of catchments now. So I've already mentioned this idea in terms of the ribbon with Civil 3D in terms of catchments, what you can see, and then some of the other options now that you will have in terms of working with catchments. So we'll look at those things. But so catchments in Civil 3D, you can create them from surfaces. So based upon a surface, pick on a surface, create a catchment area, delineate a catchment area from a surface. The catchments provide a flow path that can be created with your catchment. It also draws a discharge point based upon, this ideal of hydraulically most distant point that is calculated. So one of the things that you will run into is this idea about hydraulically most distant length, because when you create the catchment, it kind of shows the hydraulic line in terms of the actual furthest distance away, but it's based upon the time that it takes for the water to go that distance, not necessarily from the furthest point going across the actual catchment area. And then the calculation may not result in a valid catchment based upon the discharge point. In order to produce that area for the catchment, triangulation. So if you think about it, sometimes you use that water drop command and it only goes so far, even though you know it goes ultimately to this discharge or tributary point. Well, the reason it doesn't, because the triangles don't form a channel or slope that continuously go to that point. Okay, so just some quick things. All right. So what you will see in 2024 and previous, you will see this catchment properties, of course. You can tie a catchment to a structure based upon a surface with a time of concentration and a runoff coefficient. You can use user-defined or TR55. And basically what it creates is it creates sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and shows me my catchment area and then the flow length. It also puts an elevation. So you will see that automatically. In version 2025, now you will see the catchment properties that show your catchment name, catchment style, also Runoff, a runoff tab that shows you volumetrics for runoff coefficients, time of concentration, hydraulic properties, sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and channel flow. And you also will see in the catchment properties whether it's exclusionary, a reference pipe network that you want to tie the catchment to, and also the catchment surface that it's referencing. So why do I make the point of sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and channel flow? Well, some of these things you cannot change. You must change those in the actual path properties for your catchment area. So just something to think about. All right. So catchments. So some real quick stuff, because catchments, you can draw water paths. Most of us haven't used the draw a catchment from a specific area. I'm going to look at the water drop. I'm going to show specifically proposed catchment areas and how they particularly should look, and then how to calculate surface catchment areas. So just those quick things, and I'm not going to bore you with a lot of definitions and things like that, but these are some of the things that you'll be taking a look at. So, and then flow paths are calculated, time of concentration, TR55, and user defined. Okay, so flow path must have multiple segments in order for it to be a continuous flow path. They're defined in catchment settings, and then flow paths don't have grips, even though you can create a flow path manually. So it's just some things that you want to look at. But with InfoDrainage, with the right solution, you can confidently address the most challenging design and approval hurdles. So better projects, better outcomes with InfoDrainage. And from your initial concept to a detailed design, you can get from conceptual to detailed design with InfoDrainage, from Civil 3D straight into InfoDrainage. Interoperability matters. The life cycle of a project matters, specifically if you're using one application, such as Civil 3D. And then you have built-in integration, Civil 3D, imagery, aerial imagery, CAD data, GIS data, and then also the ability to optimize workflows for faster approvals. Okay. That is my little spiel. But now, how about some hands-on? So it'll just take a second here. Just take a second here because I want to take a look at Civil 3D. So I'm just going to swap my screen just so you will be able to see this. So I'm going to swap my screen. It just takes a second. Not a big deal. You should be able to see the screen now. Okay. So how are we with time? Just making sure. All right. So we have Civil 3D. So one of the things we wanted to be able to take a look at is this is Civil 3D 2025. And there's some things that you will see. So one of the things that I made reference to was this ideal. And I like to pick on things. And the reason I like to pick on things is because if I pick on a Civil 3D object, it gives me this contextual ribbon of the things I can do with the object that I selected, opposed to going up here trying to find these objects. Okay. So with Civil 3D, we looked at this little item right here. This catchment area, it's really not for modeling. Now, years ago when we wanted to generate a catchment area, for instance, if I go in and select catchment area, and I picked a specific point, it gives me a catchment area. But it doesn't give me anything. It's just a polyline, which is why in the PowerPoint I put, really don't need to use it because you can't use it for modeling unless you add some information and data to it. Now, over in the Prospector tab, a little bit different. We have these catchments. If I right-click and create a catchment group, so I'll create a catchment group and we'll say this is phase 1. And I'll select OK. So I'm manually creating a catchment. So if I right-click in my properties, I can create a catchment from an object or from a surface. Well, an object would be that polyline, right? And then creating a catchment from the surface would be just selecting this surface. So if I pick on this and just pick this point right here, it's going to bring up this properties box in reference to catchment with the next counter, catchment number 1. I can put it in a group, phase 1, from the existing ground topo. I can reference a specific structure. Also, I can reference a pipe network structure and specific pipe network. Also, you have 2 tabs. One is catchment with name, style for your labels. And then you have a flow path. And I talked about TR55 and user defined. And then I'll just select OK. So it creates a catchment for me. So from this catchment, it shows us shallow concentrated flow. So if I pick on the catchment, it shows me flow paths and catchment properties. And if I want to edit my catchment property, it brings up this information tab, my runoff, and my catchment property. So here's my catchment. With runoff, it's showing me volumetrics for my runoff. TR55, I can change that by picking on it to user defined. And then I have some hydraulic properties in reference to hydraulic most distant length, which is what it showed you, and then catchment properties. Now, if I pick on it, it shows me my catchment properties where I'm referencing my pipe network, my pipe network structure, and then also the surface. Now, anytime you see on these properties that it's not referencing a surface, the reason why it's not referencing a surface is because if you create it from an object, it doesn't know that you're referencing it from the surface. So just some simple things that you will see. But a simple label. But if we look at this, distance, we say, wait a minute. Now it calculates the slope and the distance, but depending on the length of that would be something to be desired. One of the things that I always look at in terms of my existing ground surface is my topo and where water is draining to, because ultimately we need to determine how to get water to a certain point. So I always turn on my slope arrows. And if you look at your slope arrows, you can see where water would be draining to a little bit more clear. The other thing that I like to use, and I'm just going to cut that right back off. So slope arrows. The other thing that I like to use is this idea of if I pick on a surface, this water drop tool. Now this water drop tool gives me a couple options. Most importantly, whether you're going to use a 2D line or a 3D line. The reason I use 3D is so I can see visually when I look at my surface in 3D. So I'm going to use a 3D polyline. I'm just going to put a couple lines in here in reference to water drop. Just some little lines in here in reference to. And clearly, if I picked on it, my surface, because that is where the water is draining to. If I picked on it and said catchment area, remember the one that doesn't do any modeling? If I came and picked on that, that's going to give me my catchment area. Secondly, based upon that catchment area, in this phase, I can create a catchment from an object. Here's my object. Here's my furthest point that it's kind of locating there. And then it takes me to the same process. Okay. So same thing in reference to what I did. Just did one manually, then did one from creating from an object. One of the things that I made reference to is I like to use 3D polylines. And the reason is because if I select on my polylines and my surface, right click and go to object viewer. And let's just make sure this comes up. If I go in and look at this Southwest isometric, that hydraulic distance, and if it doesn't create a flow all the way through, there's a reason why it doesn't. And I like to see that in 3D. It just gives me a better view of what's going on in terms of my site. Okay. Now, catchments in Civil 3D, pretty straightforward. As I move on here, I have some catchments that I created based upon this parking lot. And a colleague of mine worked on this project long ago, probably 10 years ago. But if I pick on my surface, I like to use the water drop. This is a finished grade. If I pick on it and pick this point, it shows me where water is flowing to. No matter what. This is proposed. Also, if I pick on my surface, and where is that water flowing to? Right to the structure. Building surface models matters in Civil 3D, but I'm going to select this catchment area. This catchment area, and I'm just going to pick the structure. And it creates a catchment for me. And if I pick here, it creates a catchment for me. So it's grabbing the area. But based upon that, well, what do my triangles look like? Because drainage is always a priority, and where water is flowing to. Well, I want water to be flowing to this inlet, and this inlet, and this inlet. Building a surface accurately matters, so your catchment areas reflect what the actual model that you're building is going to be. Okay. So far, just moving right along here. So what about this thing with InfoDrainage? Because we have these catchment areas. Well, these catchment areas, I want to be able to bring into a drawing. So one, if I go to my home tab, let's just insert. Let's see if I can bring this into a drawing. I want to insert a catchment area. So these are going to be my catchment areas. So I'm going to select this and this, 0, 0. And if I double pick, I've brought in some areas. So I brought in some areas. I also want to bring in a surface. Well, the simplest way to share a surface that really you want to experiment around with, I can use an XML file. So I'll select like an XML. And I'll just import a surface. It's an XML file. I import the surface, bring in the surface. It's brought in my surface. So now I have a surface. I got some catchment areas. I have even a pipe network. So to make that work, I'm going to bring in just a polyline. And I'm not going to redefine it. So I'll select 0, 0. So here's my polyline. And I'm going to explode it just to make it simple. And from this, I'm going to create a pipe network. Create a pipe network based upon my polyline. I'll pick it. It shows the flow going, which is where I want it to go. Now I'll select OK. It prompts me, and I'm going to say storm 1. I want to use my storm sewer parts list, and I just want to use a concrete pipe. I will say 12. And then from that, I want to use a cylindrical 48-inch structure. And I select OK. This is my surface. One of the things that I didn't do, which is what you will see, if I pick on this structure and go to structure properties, one of the things that it didn't do, I didn't tell it based upon my existing ground surface. So in the midst of doing some really quick things, if I came in and said create a pipe network, and we'll select OK, same process. This is critical. So still storm 1. And then, of course, 12-inch pipe. And the size of pipe doesn't even matter because I'm using it as a conceptual layout to get to InfoDrainage for my design. So I'll just come in and select concentric. And I'll select OK. Now this is a little different. So if I pick on this, this actually has properties now that reference my existing ground surface. Okay. So now we see some of these properties, and then the connections of these property, and then what catchment. Well, so far, no catchment yet. But what I can do is, from this, and this part of this process, I'm going to minimize the time in terms of doing this because I can push this to InfoDrainage, and I'm going to do that so you can see the result of it. So under catchments over here, I'm going to create a catchment group. We'll say phase 1. From this catchment group of phase 1, I want to create a catchment from an object. I'll pick it. It says at the command line, select the polyline uphill, and I'll pick it. It creates my catchment. Now I have the ability to go in here and say, this catchment is going into a specific structure. Now that that's going into that specific structure, it's storm 1, going into that specific structure. I have a catchment, I have a flow path, I select OK. It creates my catchment. Now I have a catchment over here. If I just refresh this, now I have a catchment over here that's denoted as a Civil 3D object. One of the things that's really nice, and I'm going to do some really quick things with this. Create another catchment. So this time I didn't pick. So if I pick on this catchment and go to catchment properties, it comes up with the catchment properties. Here's my runoff. Now I can go in if I didn't select that. So same thing, catchment properties. Now I can go in and pick from the screen or tell it I want to pick from the drawing this structure. And I'll select apply and OK. And I'm going to do one more. And I'm going to tell it specifically the structure. And I'm getting just the basics of how this works. So this right here, I've created this kind of layout. From this layout, I can push this straight to InfoDrainage. Now, if you have 2024 or even 2025, you have a InfoDrainage add-in where you have InfoDrainage that you can export to InfoDrainage. So I'm going to select Export to InfoDrainage. From this, I'm going to select the file where I want to push this file to, and I'm just going to call it phase 1. Save it. I'll select next. It says in phase 1, you got a pipe network, you got a surface, and you got this storm network. So I can export this storm network out. I can export the surface out with it, or I can create a new surface. So either one of them. So do not. So with this network, do not. And then here, I want to push this surface out. And I'll select next. And then it says, well, what part family do you want to use in terms of pushing this out? And the really nice thing that you can use is you can do a new mapping, or you can create and use a existing mapping. An existing mapping from InfoDrainage that you can create. So some specific part mappings that you can create so you wouldn't have to do this over and over again. And you could also add mappings. So not a big deal thus far. I'll select next, and then next. And then this concrete pipe. This is going to be a 12-inch. And then on my junction, this one is going to be a 4-foot. And I select finish. Then it exports it out. We won't worry about that for the moment. So I'll export that out. So far, straight workflow. I've created this conceptual plan. I've created this existing ground. I've got some site details. I've got a surface. I got a storm sewer network that I created from scratch. And then I have also the catchment areas. Well, what if someone came up to me and said, well, can you do me a profile of this storm sewer so I can get an idea what it looks like? In the past, you would have to create this pipe and utilities and create an alignment in a pipe. I don't use that. But what I will use, just in case you all don't use it, is I'll go right here to Project Explorer. Project Explorer. I'll come right here to my pipe network and pick this storm. And there it is. I didn't create any surface. I didn't create any profile. I didn't create any alignment. There it is right there. Pretty straightforward. It's grabbed the rules from the structures and the pipes, and it's added in for my profile. And I don't need to see it because right now, not a big deal. Okay. So, what is a big deal is that we need to look at what happens in InfoDrainage. Okay. So the first thing is I'm going to switch screens. And that just takes a moment. Just a moment. So, okay. So maybe you can see it already. So I'm just going to double check because I just want to be able to share my screen just to make sure. Okay. Perfect. There we are. Okay. Got it. So, let's just see what happens. When we export the model from InfoDrainage, it creates an InfoDrainage file. So I'm just going to open it up to see what we get. There's that phase 1. It's a IDDX file. So I'll just open it up. It says file cannot be loaded. It was created. Nice. When you're using Civil 3D, you want to use the same version of InfoDrainage that you're using with Civil 3D. Now, this is InfoDrainage 2024. It just happened to be open. But we're going to address that pretty quick. And let's just take a moment. Are there any questions, Misty, just as I'm kind of moving along?
Yeah, we did have one question here. Wesley said, how does it pick How does it pick that runoff coefficient?
You could put and change that runoff coefficient. It's set for a default, but you can put your runoff coefficient in there. Sorry about that.
Yep, that's the only question right now.
Okay, so can you still see my screen? Everything's still good?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so wonderful. So now, again, version 2025 if you're using Civil 3D 2025. So I'll just come in and open this up, and let's see what happens this time. Here's this phase 1. And I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to bring this in. And once this comes in, and you will notice some similarities on my plan and import tab. So one of the things, so that file, not that that file didn't come in, we'll make sure. So that file didn't come in, but we're going to get to that in a moment. So one of the things I wanted to be able to do, let's move this out the way. We got a couple things going on here, is with InfoDrainage, you can bring in a surface from Civil 3D. You can bring in CAD data from Civil 3D. You can bring in GIS data from Civil 3D. You also can bring in aerial imagery. And then you have these different tabs. So what you will not see in 2024 and earlier versions is land use and soil type. So one of the things that I've kind of preached about InfoDrainage in terms of its flexibility and user friendliness is this idea that you can come in and you have on your toolbox tab over here, you got inflows, you got junctions, you got connections, and you have polygons for soil types. You won't see these in 2024. This is in 2025.5. So the first thing is, what is it to create a catchment? So if I came up and I could right click, import this data in, or I can just come over here. And when we look at our inflows, we can see we have stormwater controls, we have catchment areas, we got inflows, and then just different things in terms of height, hydrology, and stormwater controls. The first thing is if I just pick on and drag to the center of my site, and hold on for a second. Let's do this new. So pick on this, and then I can create a catchment area, and I'll right click and it creates my catchment area. I'll right click and select, then I'll double pick on this. And remember the defaults, same defaults, but it gives me a runoff tab, a pollutions tab, an advanced tab, and a rainwater tab. And then it has these calculators. So if I want to generate time of concentration, I can specifically go in here and tell it what the method that I want to use for my time of concentration. So I can calculate that out pretty quick. And then also, if I want to do volumetrics for my dynamic sizing, so time of concentration, also preliminary sizing, time of concentration. That has calculators in here, user friendly. Pollutions, an advanced tab, and then rainwater. So this is my runoff. I also have this idea of land use. Now, when I make reference to land use, two things. I'll pick on this. And I'll go to, and again, similar to catchment areas. Land use, just different. So land use, you could come in and put a percentage, and you also can tell it specifically what condition. Also, the cover type. And what land use. So, and these are new with InfoDrainage. So again, percentage impervious. Well, we need to determine curve numbers if we're going to use multiple catchment areas, right? So land use. And I'll select OK. And if I bring in another one, and I'll just sit it right here. And then we have the ability to use these object snaps. And I'll just pick right on here. And I'll come right here, and right click. And double pick on this. Here's my second area for land use. Okay, so I have the ability to create land use. So one of the things that you can do, and if I pick on this and move this over, so we don't get confused about that. So this catchment area, with this catchment area, what we can do is it has my land use and soil types. So as I move this, and I'm going to leave it right here on the screen, if I move this over, see my percentage invert? It automatically calculates my curve number for me, for my average. So automatically. So if I move it over here, automatically calculates that. So land use, soil types, you can do all those things. If I pick soil type, I can even bring in a soil type. And if I right click on it, right click and select and double pick. And I have different soil types. And I'll select OK. So my catchment area gives me the ability to look at land uses and soil types to generate a curve number for my catchment area. These are new in 2025. That's the first thing. Now, back to that site layout. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight these all. And you can see, just like CAD, you can delete them. No big deal. Excuse me. So, on the other hand, I want to be able to bring in those inflows. So if I right click, I can import from CAD. So from those inflows, if I select my inflows from a developed area, which was that drawing, and I'll select next. And then I can tell it specifically, from that inflows area, what I want to bring in based upon those areas. So when I select next, it shows me that actual CAD drawing and how many catchment areas it brings in. So remember, inflow, you can create these templates that you can use all the time. You also can import different summaries. So if I double pick on that, it's giving me my catchment area. Pretty straightforward. So from CAD, you can import those same areas that I had straight in from CAD. Pretty straightforward. And if you want it, you have the ability to undo and redo. So some really nice things in reference to InfoDrainage. So to speed up the process, just coming back here, select next, select all. I think we want that to be feet, meters. So you have the option, or meters or feet, and then you have the options to bring it in on specific layers. And then you also have the option to bring in zoom extents and bring in from a template file. So you have those options. So once I bring this in and I select next, then I can tell it this a catchment area, and then I'll select finish. And again, right back, same thing, not a big deal. I can make these, if I right click, I can change the actual icon in reference to my template of what I want this to be. So residential, commercial, I can do all those things. So let me just check the time to make sure we're good. Okay, so from that, we want to be able to go in based upon these areas, and we want to be able to change volumetrics, things like that. So if I come to build and I come to tables, I can come in and it shows me my inflows for my catchment area. So preliminary percentages, volumetrics, time of concentration. Also time of concentration and volume. So I can come in and change these. So if I pick one and highlight them all, I can come in and say, okay, well, I want these to be 100% impervious. I'll change that to 100. So pretty straightforward. If I wanted to change it to 90, just pick this equal right here. Change them all to 90. So again, flexibility in terms of what I want to be able to do with InfoDrainage. I'll select OK. So again, now all those have been set. So if you got 50 catchment areas, then simply address that. Also, I want to be able to bring in one on my import tab. I want to be able to bring in GIS data. So in terms of a surface, in terms of connections. So what about connections? So if I pick on connections, right click, I can bring in a shapefile. So if you got a shapefile from the GIS, I'll bring in this pipe network. I'll select next. It kind of loads that same one that I kind of drew. From that, I can tell it specifically it's a pipe. And then it's a manhole. So just a manhole. And then from that, I can come in here and map these. So I can go here and do these manually, but I can load from a template. Time consuming. So it's loaded everything in. And now I want to just import it in. It says imported 20 junctions, 19 pipes. If you notice, if I pick on a pipe now and double pick, it says, okay, well, this is a manhole. It's got the depth based upon my surface. It's got the inlet and what is connected to. Pretty straightforward. Working with Civil 3D and InfoDrainage. Seamless integration back and forth, specifically with catchments. So bringing in that pipe network, not a big deal. Bringing in catchment areas, not a big deal. Bringing in structures, not a big deal. So a lot of flexibility in terms of working seamless with this one application over the life cycle of a project. Now, ultimately, I also want to be able to import aerial. So I'll bring in this aerial. And it already has the information from my aerial. So I'll just bring in an aerial. So simple data. Now, what about that idea of looking at this in a profile? Well, I'll just zoom in and down on the flow paths, select add, and I'll pick my first structure up here and all the way to my structure down there. And then I'll right click and say show profile. Well, there's no analysis done, but a simple profile. So pretty straightforward, simple profile. But if I wanted to, well, let's just check the time frame here, because we got pretty much everything that we need. We have on the import tab, we've looked at these things where we can import. And then we got rainfall data. And then with our rainfall data, I can select my rainfall manager. From this rainfall manager, I can expand this and say, yeah, maybe this is over in Europe. But do we have the SCS method? We got NOAA. So we got all these different methods for our design storms. So from this, if I right click and say add, I can go in and specifically tell it for my design storms, my return period. I can add a return period. And then for my storm duration, I just select add and select all. Then I'll select OK. And then from this, from my preliminary sizing, I can come in and say network design wizard. And then on my network design wizard, it's showing me everything in reference to upstream, downstream, Manny's coefficient, my slopes, my connection types. Then I'll go select next. And then it says, well, what storm do you want to use? Well, I want to use that FEH one. Now, this one, I got to go back because this return period, just making sure we're good. And then from that, we'll select next. Let me just make sure. We'll add this because I didn't select that one. Let's say 2 and 10. And then we'll add one more. We'll say 100. Yeah. 50. Select OK. We'll select next. Make sure everything is set. I'll select those. Select OK. Select next. We gotta come back. And let me just double check. Get my mouse out the way here. And if I read that message again, one or more values incorrect highlighted. Draw, let's see. Return period. Select OK. Select next. FHH. Let me make sure. We'll come back. Come back. Let me just do this again. A 2-year, we'll add a 10-year. I'll make this simple and say 2%. Storm duration, we'll say 15, 20. Network design wizard. we come in, then we can tell it minimum, maximum, grade, elevation, slopes, whether we want something to change, manhole size. We'll select next. And then it tells me, if I hold my cursor, what my previous slope was, It makes suggestions to manually adjust the slope. It tells me what my previous diameter is, and I'll select next. Then I'll select finish. And then it says, okay, you've designed this for me now. So from this, if I do a flow path again, I'll add this flow path again. And show profile. And if I zoom in, it's designed my pipe network for me. So something from scratch, and because of the scale that I'm looking at, it's designed my pipe network for me. Straight from scratch. And I brought that from CAD, but just kind of skipped a couple of processes. And then you can push this back and export it out right back to Civil 3D. So once I save this, I can move it right back out to Civil 3D. Something else to keep in mind. Stormwater controls, swales, structures, cellular storage. Well, maybe I want a chamber here. So from that, underground chamber. If I double click on that, it's going to give me information in terms of rows and columns, outfall. It just gives me everything that I need. And if I want to look at that, it shows me underground chamber. Again, flexibility. Okay, so maybe not underground chamber. How about if we say we want to put in a pond? We say we want to put in a pond and pick this pond. We just give a quick shape. And you can bring an AutoCAD shape if you wanted to. If I double click on it, it's giving me properties for a pond. And if I want to see what the pond looks like, it shows me a pond. So I can have wet pond, dry pond, infiltration. I can have multiple examples of what a pond looks like. I can go in here and design for my pond in terms of volume or area. And then I also can size this pond based upon quick volume storage estimate. So a lot of flexibility. So there's 5 different challenges in terms of what we run into in terms of hydrology problems. I'm doing multiple webcasts that kind of walks through each one of those challenges. So just for future reference, because one, green infrastructure is very challenging. Green infrastructure. We know the pressures that come with green infrastructure. InfoDrainage has the solutions. Also, a lot of manual work. Well, not if you use InfoDrainage. A lot of manual work, calculators, spreadsheets. InfoDrainage addresses all of those things. And then, of course, it's the iterative process in terms of doing that. So, and then, of course, design is an iterative process. And then you have, after all of that, deal with these regulatory compliances. Where, yeah, a lot of pressures from that, right? But to get the right outcomes, using the right solution. But all this streams from the idea of starting out with something as simple as a catchment area. And something as simple as a catchment area, better project outcomes when you use the right software. And I think for now, InfoDrainage is that design and analysis tool that will take you from an initial concept, which we've seen, to a detailed design. So, built-in integrations, you already have Civil 3D. Some of us have GIS departments. We already use CAD. we can bring all those things together, which would shorten our design times, allow design teams to optimize workflows. Civil 3D, InfoDrainage, back to Civil 3D. As an example, just as we're kind of going here, as an example, let's bring that right back up in terms of this. So, if we save that InfoDrainage file, right? Got to save that file. File. Save as. To example. Save it. Okay. Now we'll come back and say, okay, on the InfoDrainage tab, we'll say import from InfoDrainage. Well, what? We want to import this phase 2 example. And select open. And next. And we'll see, there may be some things, this phase 2, do not import Civil 3D surfaces. Well, let's close that InfoDrainage file. Let's close it. And let's see. Let's go. We'll go next. No phase. Let's try that one more time. Import InfoDrainage. Maybe that didn't close that. Yeah. We'll do this as an example. I got some other things going on. I built a pond thing, so let's just look at this real quick. And then we'll be finished. And then if there's questions, I'll try to address the questions. InfoDrainage. InfoDrainage. Make this simple but sweet. Yeah, select OK. Select next. Storm, select next. Pipe. Select finish junction. Let's make sure we're good here. Civil 3D part. Structure. Pipe. Pan. Let's scroll over here. Once we catch up. Once it catches up. While I'm opening that back up as I'm clicking, this never goes as fast as this, but are there any questions, Misty?
We do have one. I know we're a little bit over time, but they're really enjoying the content that you're sharing. But Stan did say, how can you control what area of grass and area of pavement is sent to your drainage basin?
That would be with the polyline with the soils. You can do with the land use and soil. You can control in CAD. You can just draw that same area and bring it in as an object and use it on the soil type with InfoDrainage. Or you can do it with the land use and then you can control that specific area. So for instance, if you had an image, you could control exactly where that is. Just in case. Yeah. Yeah. And then again, that's your land use. and whether it's open space or whatever the case it may be. And you can do that with land use or soil type. Okay. Okay. No, so that's it. So even though you can go back and forth from within for drainage and do all these different things, again, more ease and flexibility, but hydroflow is antiquated. Storm and sanitary analysis is antiquated. Try a 30-day trial. Contact me. I'll walk you through some things. I'll even show you some resources where you can go step by step. And they also have tutorials. But thank you for your time. I've enjoyed hanging out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kenneth. Yeah, you guys, if you are interested in a free trial, if you're interested in one-on-one or group training, you can answer that in the poll questions. You can also send any of your questions or interests to webinars@graitec.com. It'll come straight to me. I'll get you hooked up with the right person, the right answers, and everything that you need. But I do want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope it was meaningful and impactful for you and your businesses. Kenneth, thank you so much as well. And we do look forward to seeing you all on future webinars. Have a wonderful rest of the day.